tool I want to share in this video is a tool called a decision matrix. It is a decision-making tool, as you'd expect. It's not a problem-solving tool. It doesn't solve anything else, but it's where you have a decision to make amongst different alternatives. So it could be where you go on holiday. It could be which university your children go to. It could be which project you decide to take on, or any other situation where you're faced with alternatives. And the way it works is we start with listing what our various options are. And I've taken what could be some of the services that a council might provide. By the way, my scoring here is done from a position of considerably relative ignorance, because I don't work at the council, so don't take my scoring as anything kind of meant to be accurate. It is just by way of demonstrating how the tool works. So I said, well, let's say we could choose between providing meals, we could do rubbish collections, we can cut the grass, we can invest in, helping our local businesses. As let's say there are 4 options as to how we spend our money. And the second thing we do is say, well, what criteria are important in deciding where our priorities should lie? And you can have as many as you like, but I've gone with 4 here. You don't really want more than 6 or 7, but I've gone with 4. And I've said, well, community impact is important. Cost, I said careful. I'll just explain why in a minute. Ease of delivery, and maybe fit with our purpose. To what extent does this fit with our purpose? And the next thing to do is to say, well, let's put some relative weightings to understand the importance of these relative criteria, because some will be more important than others. We're suggesting here that our total weighting is 100. So all we're doing is allocating 100 points, if you like, relatively to each of those 4. And rightly or wrongly, I suggested that, well, if something's making a high community impact, that's really important. So I've given that 35 points. The next one, I've fit with purpose, which is basically to look after our residents. I've given 30. Cost, which is obviously important more and more these days, I've given 25. And something that's easy to deliver, that's attractive, so I've given that some points. I've given that 10, or whatever in your situation you choose to do. What we then do is we go along the lines and we score each of our options out of the weighting, so maximum 35 points on this one, as to whether they're high or low. And so meals, you might say, well, that's pretty high because we're giving good impact to our community where it's needed, so we'll score that, let's say 25 out of 35. Collections, probably more because we're reaching a wider audience, so we're going to give that higher. Cutting the grass, pretty low in terms of community impact. Some will disagree, but generally speaking, so we give that 10. And then impact on businesses, that's pretty wide too, on employment and so on, so we give that 25. And so on. And the reason I said careful on cost is that it's got a kind of polarity issue. It's got a reverse polarity, because something with a high score is a good thing, and so it will score highly. But obviously cost is a bad thing, relatively speaking. And so something with a high cost, rather than have a high score, has a low score. So we've said here that, well, relatively speaking, meals, it costs a reasonable amount to deliver. So it's got a relatively low score. Similarly, rubbish collections cost a lot of money, obviously. So that's got a lower score, whereas cutting the grass costs less. And so on. But again, this is out of 25 points for this line. So just watch the polarity, and something like risk would be another one. High risk, low score. You've got to be careful to get it the right way around, otherwise you'll get the scoring wrong and you'll get the wrong answer. So be careful on that. That's a trap. So go through, do your scores on the various things, add up the columns, be careful to do it accurately, otherwise you'll get the wrong answers. And when you look at the relatively high scores of each different item, there's a very intuitive moment where it either feels right or it feels wrong. And just because you scored it a certain way doesn't mean it's right. And so there's a very intuitive moment here as well, which is very powerful. And it's just a way of looking at alternatives and seeing how they kind of come out. As you can see, rightly or wrongly, cutting grass is scored pretty low, and that's why a lot of councils, I guess, are cutting the grass a lot less, apart from the obvious argument about helping the insects and the animals and so on, but actually overall, if you're going to cut somewhere, that's probably not a bad place to go, for a lot of these reasons. So that's the decision matrix. It's a tool to use when you have alternatives. List your alternatives, list the different criteria you're going to use, do the relative weightings, and then score out of the weighting the relative items and add them up and see what wins. And obviously, if the right one you wanted to win hasn't come up, you've got to find it some more points from somewhere. So you've got to put a strategy in place to get more points. So that's the decision matrix. Good luck with that.